Anglo-Saxon economic strengths. Anglo-Saxon England, particularly in the period leading up to 1066, was one of the wealthiest countries in Europe. Its prosperity was largely rooted in a highly productive agricultural sector, benefiting from a generally favourable climate. The southern and eastern regions of England were particularly fertile, ideal for cultivating staple crops such as wheat, barley, and oats. This agricultural abundance formed the backbone of the economy, providing food security and surplus for trade. Conversely, the western parts of the country, with their more rugged terrain and wetter climate, were well suited for livestock farming. Sheep, cattle, and pigs were raised in significant numbers, contributing to a diverse and resilient agricultural economy. The efficient agricultural practices, including the widespread use of the open field system and crop rotation, maximized yields. This systematic approach to farming ensured a consistent food supply and generated wealth that supported the entire social structure. Trade and currency control. England's economic strength was significantly bolstered by its extensive trade links across the seas. Major routes connected England to Scandinavia via the North Sea and to Normandy and Flanders across the English Channel. These trade networks facilitated the export of valuable English goods, primarily raw wool, finished cloth, tin, and lead, which were highly sought after in continental Europe. In return, England imported luxury items such as wine from France, fine pottery, and other manufactured goods. The king maintained central control over the money supply and the designated trading centres known as burhs. This strict oversight ensured the reliability and stability of the currency, primarily silver pennies, which were minted in various royal mints across the kingdom. The reliability of English coinage was crucial for fostering trust in commercial transactions, both domestically and internationally. Furthermore, by mandating that all significant trade occur within burhs, the king could effectively tax transactions, thereby boosting royal revenues and benefiting the nobility who oversaw these centres. Anglo-Saxon social structure. Anglo-Saxon society in 1060 was rigidly hierarchical, with the king at the apex, followed by a small but powerful aristocracy. The total population of England at this time was estimated to be around 2 million people, a significant number for the medieval period. At the top of the social pyramid, beneath the king and his immediate family, were the earls, who governed vast regions of the kingdom. Below them were the Thegns, a warrior noble class who formed the backbone of the Anglo-Saxon military and local administration. The vast majority of the population, approximately 90%, consisted of peasant farmers known as Ceorls. These individuals formed the agricultural workforce, cultivating the land and supporting the upper classes through their labor and payments. At the very bottom of the social hierarchy were the slaves, who constituted about 9.7% of the population. They were considered property and had very few rights, performing the most arduous and undesirable tasks. Thegns, Ceorls, and slaves. Thegns were the Anglo-Saxon warrior class, a vital component of the kingdom's defense and administration. To qualify as a Thegn, an individual typically needed to own at least 5 hides of land, which provided the economic basis for their status. Their landholdings enabled them to afford essential military equipment, including weapons, armor, and a horse, making them effective cavalry and infantry. Thegns were expected to be constantly ready to serve their lord in battle, often fighting to the death to protect him and their community. Ceorls, or peasant farmers, formed the vast majority of the population and were largely dependent on Thegns or other lords for land and work. While most Ceorls were tied to the land, some enjoyed a freer status, possessing small plots of land and greater autonomy. Slaves were the lowest rung of society, treated as property that could be bought and sold. Individuals could fall into slavery due to debt, crime, or being captured in warfare. though there were instances where slaves could be freed by their masters and potentially rise to the status of Ceorls. The role of burhs. Burhs were fortified main towns of each shire, serving as crucial administrative, economic, and defensive centres in Anglo-Saxon England. Their strategic placement and robust construction were vital for the kingdom's security and prosperity. These fortified settlements provided a safe refuge for people from the surrounding countryside during times of invasion, particularly from Viking raiding parties. The strong walls and ramparts made burhs exceptionally difficult to attack, offering protection to both inhabitants and their livestock. Economically, burhs were designated as the sole locations where all significant trade was legally permitted to occur. This central control over commerce allowed the king and local authorities to effectively tax transactions, generating substantial revenue for the crown and local governance. Around 10% of England's population lived in towns by 1060, with the majority residing within these burhs. The burghal hidage system, a list of burhs and their required maintenance, ensured that these fortifications were consistently manned and repaired, reflecting their importance to national defence and economic stability. The Anglo-Saxon Church. Influence. The Anglo-Saxon Church held immense power and influence throughout England, deeply intertwined with both spiritual and secular governance. Bishops, in particular, were exceptionally wealthy and politically significant figures. These bishops controlled vast church districts, often encompassing large tracts of land and numerous communities. Their wealth derived from extensive landholdings and tithes, granting them considerable economic and social leverage. Crucially, important bishops were always members of the Witan, the King's Advisory Council. Their presence ensured the Church's voice was heard in matters of state, lawmaking, and royal succession, solidifying its political authority. Given that very few people in Anglo-Saxon England were literate, the Church played an indispensable role in administration. Monasteries and cathedrals served as the primary centres for learning, providing all the king's clerks and record keepers, thus maintaining the kingdom's written records and legal documents. The Anglo-Saxon Church. Local clergy. While the higher echelons of the church were powerful and educated, the situation at the local parish level was often quite different. Most local priests in Anglo-Saxon England lived much like peasants, farming their own plots of land to sustain themselves. These local priests were generally not well educated, often lacking formal theological training, and many were married, a practice that was common in England, despite growing calls for clerical celibacy from continental Europe. This contrasted sharply with the monastic communities. Monks and nuns, on the other hand, lived in separate enclosed communities, adhering to strict religious rules, often the Benedictine rule. They also farmed their own lands, but their lives were dedicated to prayer, study, and manual labor within their monastic enclosures, distinct from the lay population. The Anglo-Saxon Church, particularly its English bishops, showed a notable resistance to reforms emanating from Europe, such as the Gregorian reforms, which advocated for clerical celibacy and an end to simony. English bishops largely preferred to maintain their traditional practices and autonomy. Social mobility and obligations. Anglo-Saxon society, while hierarchical, possessed a degree of flexibility that allowed for some social mobility, particularly for peasant farmers. It was possible for a ceorl to rise in status and become a thegn if they achieved significant economic success. The path to becoming a thegn typically involved acquiring at least 5 hides of land, a bell, a gate, and a seat in the king's hall. This demonstrated sufficient wealth and standing to be recognized as a member of the warrior noble class, capable of fulfilling military obligations. Conversely, social mobility could also occur in the opposite direction. Peasants who experienced severe hardship, such as famine or debt, might be forced to sell themselves or their families into slavery to survive, illustrating the precariousness of life for the lower classes. The social system was underpinned by a complex web of reciprocal obligations. Just as a vassal provided military service or labor to his lord in return for land and protection, peasants provided labor service or rent to their lords in exchange for the right to work the land and receive protection.